Have you ever wondered how a man born in the slums of Brooklyn rose to become one of the most feared figures in American history? A man whose name still strikes terror and fascination to this day, Al Scarface Capone. But how did this gangster, known for his ruthlessness and cunning, come to be called Scarface? Was it just a random nickname, or was it a title forged in blood, fire, and ambition? In today's video, we're diving into the true origin of Al Capone's infamous moniker and the dark, dangerous story behind the scars that marked him for life. Before Al Capone became the ruthless crime lord known as Scarface, he was just another kid born to Italian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York on January 17, 1899. Raised in a poor working-class family, Capone's early life was anything but glamorous. His father, Gabriele, was a barber, and his mother, Teresina, worked as a seamstress. They were part of the wave of Italians who immigrated to America in the early 1900s, searching for a better life. But life on the streets of Brooklyn wasn't kind. Young Al was exposed to violence and crime early on. He dropped out of school after just a few years and joined street gangs, like the 5 Points Gang, where he learned the harsh rules of survival in the streets. By 1920, Al Capone had moved to Chicago, a city known for its rampant corruption and organized crime. Prohibition had just gone into effect, making the production, sale, and distribution of alcohol illegal. However, it was also a huge business opportunity for those willing to bend the rules. Capone, ever the opportunist, quickly found his place in this new world of bootlegging. At first, he worked as a low-level enforcer for Johnny Torrio, the man who ran one of Chicago's most powerful gangs. Capone wasn't just any enforcer, though. He had a natural knack for intimidation and violence, quickly making a name for himself. He was known for handling business in the most brutal ways possible, and people began to take notice. His combination of street smarts, charisma, and ruthless behavior made him invaluable to Torrio, who would eventually retire, passing control of the organization to Capone. Under Capone's leadership, the Chicago outfit grew rapidly. He expanded his operations to include not just bootlegging, but gambling, prostitution, and labor racketeering. Capone's ability to forge alliances with local politicians, law enforcement, and even the media allowed him to operate with relative impunity. He was smart, using bribery and intimidation to keep his empire running smoothly, but also incredibly violent, orchestrating murders and assassinations to eliminate his rivals and send a clear message to anyone who dared oppose him. As Capone's wealth and power grew, so did his infamy. The public began to view him as more than just a mobster. He became a larger-than-life figure in the world of organized crime, one who was untouchable. His rise in Chicago wasn't just about power, it was about the image he projected, which was just as important as the illicit activities he was involved in. This image was sharpened by his appearance, his style, and yes, the infamous scars that would soon make him more than just another gangster in the eyes of the public. Now, let's get to the reason behind Capone's notorious nickname, Scarface. While the gangster's violent reputation was well known, the story behind his scars isn't as commonly told. It all started in 1929. Capone, who had already cemented his place as the most powerful mobster in Chicago, encountered an incident that would change his life forever. It was in a seemingly casual setting that the scars would come to mark him for the rest of his life. During an argument at a restaurant in New York, Capone got into a confrontation with a fellow gangster named Frank the Enforcer Guglielmo. This altercation would escalate, and Capone found himself in a brutal fight that left him badly wounded. But the story of how he got these scars is still a subject of mystery. Some say that the wounds were a result of a jealous lover. Others claim they were from a botched hit by rival mobsters. What we do know for sure is that Capone was slashed across the face, leaving deep scars that would remain for the rest of his life. From this point forward, Capone was no longer just Al. He was Scarface, a name that would haunt him and define him for years to come. But what's interesting about this nickname is that it wasn't one that Capone embraced right away. In fact, he hated it. He would often wear makeup to cover his scars, trying to downplay their significance, and even refused to be called Scarface by his close associates. He preferred the more polished image of a suave businessman, a man who could charm his way into any room. However, the press had a different idea. Newspapers newspapers began to use the term Scarface relentlessly, turning it into a symbol of his criminal identity. As time went on, Capone's initial reluctance faded, and the name stuck. Over the years, the nickname evolved from a simple reference to Capone's scars to a symbol of his power and status. The name represented the darker side of the American dream, the rise to power through violence and crime with no regard for moral boundaries. In the minds of many, Scarface became synonymous with unrelenting ambition, survival at any cost, and a sheer disregard for the law. It encapsulated not just the physical damage he endured, but the ruthless tactics he employed to climb to the top. The legacy of Scarface grew even stronger after Capone's fall from power. Although he spent the final years of his life in prison, the nickname endured long after his death. It became an iconic symbol of gangster life. In fact, Hollywood would later capitalize on this image, and the 1983 film Scarface, starring Al Pacino, would go on to solidify the cultural impact of Capone's moniker. Although the film wasn't about Capone himself, it drew heavily from his persona, capturing the essence of a criminal obsessed with power and willing to do whatever it took to maintain control. But the legacy of Scarface wasn't limited to film and media. It also became a part of American folklore. Even decades after Capone's death in 1947, the image of Scarface remained one of the most enduring and recognizable symbols of the Prohibition era. It embodied the intersection of fame, fear, and criminal notoriety, influencing generations of criminals, filmmakers, and pop culture. Through the nickname Scarface, Capone's story continued to resonate with people, ensuring his place in history as one of the most notorious figures of all time. While Capone was once untouchable, his criminal empire began to crumble. The rise of law enforcement, spearheaded by figures like Elliot Ness and his untouchables, led to Capone's eventual conviction for tax evasion. He would spend the last years of his life in prison, weakened by syphilis and the toll of his violent lifestyle. But even in his decline, the name Scarface remained. Capone would die in 1947, but his legacy lived on not just as a gangster, but as an iconic figure, forever etched into the history of organized crime. And so, the story of Al Capone's scars, both literal and metaphorical, remains an enduring part of his mythos. They weren't just marks of violence, they were symbols of a man who overcame the odds, defied the law, and left a lasting impression on the world. His nickname, Scarface, will forever stand as a reminder of the high price one pays for power and dominance.